Have you ever noticed that two people can read the exact same headline and one carries it for 5 minutes while the other carries it for 5 days? The difference isn't that one person cares more, it's that one person let it move through them and the other let it move in. I've been thinking a lot about that lately. We spend so much time talking about protecting our energy. We talk about setting boundaries, avoiding toxic people, and taking breaks from social media, protecting our peace. But I don't think that's actually where it starts. I think it starts one step earlier with our attention. Because whatever has your attention eventually has your energy. And whatever has your energy quietly begins shaping your whole life. Not all at once, just a little bit every single day. So, today I want to talk about something we've touched on before, but from a different angle. Not just observation versus absorption, the moment that happens before either one, where we get to choose. Hi, loves. Welcome back to Amy's View Unscripted. I'm Amy, and this is Life in Motion, our space to slow down for a little while and talk about what really keeps life moving: self love, personal growth, and living with intention. Because when we learn to care for ourselves well, we don't just change our own lives. We change the way that we show up for the people around us and for the world that we all share. I've been catching myself thinking I need to protect my energy a lot lately. And maybe you've said that too. And don't get me wrong, I think it's important. There are absolutely people, situations, and habits that can drain us. But the more I sat with that thought, the more I realized I was asking the wrong question. Because by the time I'm trying to protect my energy, something has usually already gotten in. And it made me wonder, where does that actually begin? And I think I've landed on an answer. I think it begins with our attention. Think about your day for a second. Before you've even had your coffee, you've probably seen a dozen headlines. Maybe you've checked your email, scrolled social media, read a comment that rubbed you the wrong way, thought about something that happened at work yesterday, started worrying about tomorrow. None of these things seem all that significant on their own, but they all ask just for a little bit of your attention. And our attention is so often given away in tiny little pieces that we don't even notice it's happening. It's not usually one catastrophic event that leaves us feeling emotionally exhausted. It's hundreds of tiny moments. One headline, one notification, one argument in a comment section, one person's bad mood, and one memory that resurfaces when you're brushing your teeth. And in the moment, none of them seem big enough to matter until you realize that they've all come home with you. And that's when I remembered something that we talked about a while back: observation versus absorption, which you can watch here, by the way, if you're interested. We talked about how it's okay to observe what's happening in the world without absorbing every piece of it into ourselves. And I still very much believe that, maybe even more now. But I also think that there's another piece to this. I think there's a moment between observation and absorption that deserves a little more attention. Choice. There's this tiny pause, sometimes so small that we don't even realize it's there, where we get to decide, is this something I want to carry with me? Because not everything we notice deserves a permanent place in our hearts. Not every opinion deserves to shape our day. And not every headline deserves to occupy our thoughts for the next week. Not every criticism deserves to become part of our identity. We can care deeply without carrying everything. One thing I've learned is that our minds don't really care whether something deserves our attention. If we keep giving it attention, our minds assume it must be important. Think about it. If you spend 20 minutes every morning reading comments from strangers, there's a part of your mind that doesn't necessarily know that they're strangers. It just knows this must matter because we keep giving it our attention. And if you replay the same argument over and over, your brain doesn't necessarily know that the conversation ended 3 days ago. It just knows, well, we're still here, so this must be important. And if we constantly compare ourselves to everyone else's highlight reel, our brains start believing comparison is part of our everyday environment because it's familiar. And familiarity has a funny way of becoming normal. I think that's why it is so important to be intentional with what we consume. Because eventually, we become accustomed to whatever we repeatedly allow into our lives. Not identical to it, but influenced by it. The same way spending time around optimistic people tends to lift us, or spending time around people who complain constantly can leave us feeling really heavy, even if we weren't the ones complaining. It's not weakness, it's being human. We absorb pieces of the environments that we live in. And that doesn't only apply to people, it applies to what we watch, what we read, what we listen to, the conversations we keep returning to, the stories we keep telling ourselves, even the way that we speak to ourselves when nobody else is around. I don't say any of that to make anyone feel guilty. Because honestly, I've caught myself doing every single one of these things. And this isn't about becoming someone who only consumes positive, happy, beautiful things. Life doesn't work that way. There are moments when we need to sit with grief, with injustice, with hard conversations. These things do matter. Ignoring them does not make them disappear. But I do think there's a difference between being informed and being immersed, between compassion and carrying the entire weight of the world on your shoulders. But there are little escapes we can give ourselves. For example, when I sit outside with my coffee, the trees aren't competing for my attention. They simply exist. And a bird isn't trying to convince me to be angry. And the wind isn't asking me to compare myself to anyone. And a flower isn't measuring its worth against the flower beside it. Nature isn't asking me to carry it. It's simply inviting me to notice it. And maybe that's the part that's challenged me the most. Because it's easy to notice what other people are asking for my attention. It can be a little harder to notice what I'm asking of myself. How often do I replay a mistake that I made years ago? And how often do I criticize myself in the way I'd never dream of criticizing anybody else? How often do I give my attention to fear instead of possibility, and to scarcity instead of gratitude, to everything that could go wrong instead of everything that's already going right? Sometimes the loudest thing competing for our attention is our own inner voice. I think that's worth paying attention to. Because if whatever has our attention begins shaping us, then the conversations we have with ourselves matter just as much as the conversations we have with everyone else. Maybe more, probably more. If every morning I wake up and immediately tell myself that I'm behind, my attention follows that story. And if I constantly tell myself I'm not enough, my attention starts collecting evidence to support that. If I convince myself that everyone is judging me, I'll begin seeing judgment everywhere that I look. Not because the world changed somehow, but because the lens I was looking through did. And the beautiful thing about realizing that is that lenses can be changed. Not overnight, not by pretending that hard things don't exist, but by intentionally giving our attention to things that are all so true, that we've grown, that we've survived, that we've learned, that we've been loved, that we make someone laugh, that we've helped someone, that there's still beauty in the world worth noticing. I don't think this is about becoming blindly optimistic by any means, but I think it's about becoming honest. Because if I'm willing to give hours of my attention to everything that's broken, I should probably be willing to give at least a few moments to everything that is still beautiful. And maybe that's where all of this comes together for me. Protecting our attention isn't about building a smaller world, it's about making room to experience a fuller one. So maybe this week, don't just ask yourself how your energy is doing. Ask yourself where your attention has been, because the two are probably more connected than we realize. Maybe you'll notice you've been carrying around a conversation that actually ended days ago. Maybe you've been giving hours of your attention to people who have never given you 5 minutes of theirs. Or maybe you'll realize you overlooked some really beautiful things simply because your attention has been somewhere else. a sunrise, a really good cup of coffee, a conversation with someone you love, a dog wagging its tail because you walked through the front door, the breeze through the trees, a stranger holding the door open, the sound of laughter. These moments don't usually demand our attention, they quietly invite it. And maybe that's why they matter so much. Because in a world that's constantly competing to be the loudest, beauty can be the quietest voice in the room. But it's still there, waiting to be noticed. So, here's something I'd love for us all to try this week. Not a challenge to be perfect, just an invitation to become curious. Pay attention to your attention. Notice where it goes. Notice what keeps asking for it. And when you catch yourself about to carry something that doesn't belong to you, pause. Ask yourself, do I want to take this with me? You might be surprised how often the answer is no. And if the answer is no, leave it there. Instead, choose one thing each day that is worthy of your attention. Maybe it's someone you love. Maybe it's a creative project you've been putting off. Maybe it's stepping outside for 5 minutes. Maybe it's simply noticing something beautiful that you've walked past 100 times before. Because I have a feeling that changing our lives doesn't always begin with changing our circumstances. I think it begins with changing what we choose to notice. If this conversation resonated with you, I'd love to hear from you down in the comments. What has been asking for your attention lately? And maybe more importantly, what deserves more of it? I love reading what you have to say, so please tell me. And if you're enjoying Life in Motion, I'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe and share this episode with someone who might need the reminder. Every share helps this little community grow, and it means I get to keep having conversations like this with you. And hit that notification bell so you don't have to wonder when we're having our next conversation. As always, thank you for spending time with me today. And until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and don't forget to live a life you love.